The first reading. Now we enter the part of the Mass when God's Word is proclaimed. The first reading is proclaimed by a person chosen from the congregation. The primary part of the Jewish synagogue service was the reading from what the Jews called the Torah and the Nevi'im. The Torah is the first 5 books of the Old Testament. Torah is the Hebrew word for the law. Nevi'im is a less well-known word. It means the prophets, and it applies to much of the rest of the Old Testament books. We know, for instance, that when Jesus was invited to read at a synagogue service in Nazareth, he chose a reading from Nevi'im, on that particular occasion from the prophet Isaiah. The earliest celebrations of the Eucharist always included a reading from the Old Testament. Since the Second Vatican Council, the Church has restored the Old Testament to prominence because, as St. Augustine said, in the Old Testament the new is hidden, in the New Testament the old appears. On most of the Sundays of the year, the first reading is from the Old Testament, although a few times, such as during the Easter season, it is a New Testament reading. The first readings, when taken from the Old Testament, are often very difficult to proclaim. Many times they contain names and places that are very foreign to our ears. When I have come across these pronunciation problems, I make sure to say the word with conviction. After all, no one from the Old Testament is still around to correct me. However, good pronunciation does provide an excellent example of why really studying the Old Testament is essential. Next week, we will discuss the Psalms.